Okay, so you've cleaned up your geometry and now it's time to start rendering. There's a few steps and things that you need to check before you do so. There's first, make sure you can preview render. If you can't, run the render diagnostics under rendering and see what error messages it pops up. It'll pop up some pretty standard stuff, um, and but yes, it's you read through them and see which ones you can ignore and which ones you can't. So at first you take them all fairly seriously, but a lot of times they'll just say, hey, the shape node of something doesn't have a shader directly assigned to it. It's not a big deal. But if it's having problems with a TIFF image, maybe there's compression on the TIFF, it won't render in mental ray if it is. So it can get pretty darn finicky. So this is meant for just sort of simple basic rendering with Maya, software rendering. Okay, so several things is, you pick the camera you're going to render from, and let's see. Right, there we go. And you have to make sure that your near and far clipping planes are set to just the size of your scene. Okay, so I have that set up in this particular file. I've ported it out over to someplace sort of handy. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to need a little bit bigger, so maybe 2000 and a low number of 20 or something. So, but what you're looking to do with this, we pop to the perspective, is you want to have your entire scene, the front of the scene to the back of it, within that near far clipping plane, but just. Okay, so the computer divides everything up into 10 regions, and you want that 10 regions to be from the back of your scene to the front, and not the whole scene to be in the first region. Otherwise, it'll have problems sorting the triangles, and your back triangles will sit on front of your foreground objects. And so that's all it does, is it helps the computer sort. But it's a very important little detail. Okay, so all right, over here in the render settings are our key settings to mess with. And so you go through and you go, all right, hey, I need to render this out as TIFFs, SGI files. Maya IFFs are the fastest. Okay, so you want to render things out at maya.extension.number.extension, and I always set my frame padding to 4 because Adobe Premiere does not like to have the frame padding at 1, and so if I'm going to have 1,000 frames, I need to have it set at frame padding of 4. Okay, so if you just look up here at the name, and so here in the name of this file, it says armor.0.iff. If I change the frame padding there to 4, as you see now it's 0004. So yes, so it just pads out the names, the numbers on all the file extensions. Okay, so you give it your start and end frames. So in this case I have 3 frames. By frame 1, so sometimes if you want to do a test, you can render out every 2 frames or every 3 frames and see roughly how things are if you're rendering a small test. Make sure you check your cameras, and let's see, and just make sure you're using the rendering from the camera you think you're rendering from. Okay, so that's critical. Alrighty, and make sure you have alpha checked always. Alright, and then down here you just pick whatever preset you need. So these days it's usually, you know, like PAL 780 or HD. Where is the HD setting? I should have an there. HD 720, HD 1080. Okay, and so it does the presets for you, and you're in pretty good shape there. If you are using Mental Ray, turn off the Enable Default Light. Okay, so over in Maya Software, you want to set your quality to production, and maybe choose to go with Gaussian or quadratic B-spline. So the fancier and longer anti-aliasing are the lower down ones. So it goes in order there. Alrighty, and let's see, ray tracing quality. If you're ray tracing, you'd have to turn that on, and you've probably been testing with it. The problem is if you've been testing with preview quality and you have your settings of reflections and refractions to something that works, when you set to production quality, boom, it sets that to 10, 10, and 10. And you just have to remember to go back and reset that back down to whatever things worked for you. Okay, motion blur. If everything should be motion blurred, do it in After Effects or Combustion if possible. Okay, 2D is good enough most of the time. 3D for things that spin, that you're watching a rotation, might need that. Okay, but if you do it in post, no problems there. And that should pretty much do it. You make sure that make sure you've set your project, and so it goes to the source images, the images directory of your current project, and you pop over here to batch render, and so you can do pretty much always do the all available processors. Setting it to 1 still bogs down your machine even if you have 2 processors, so the machine becomes unworkable. So it's not really saving you anything, and so you hit batch render and close. Now if you're working on a PC, you can also you can go out and you can find the file, right mouse button on your Maya file, and render from a drop down here. It's not working on the Mac, but for the PCs, that would allow you to close the Maya interface, and the computer doesn't have to process that. That saves render time, and all your processor power goes to just cranking out those frames as fast as possible. So render early, render often, spot the mistakes early,